Good morning. This is Chris Jones with the University of Arizona, Gila County Cooperative Extension. I'm here for today's Garden and Country Extension webinar series. Today, we've got Ashley Hullinger with us. We're going to talk about how we transform needs into assets, establishing a watershed partnership to address environmental and economic challenges. And today is Earth Day, isn't it, Ashley? So welcome everybody and happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day. Yeah, great day to do this.
Just a little bit about these webinars. They're a weekly Zoom webinar, 60 minutes or less. I conduct them Thursdays at 11 in Arizona. They feature a variety of horticultural and natural resources topics relevant to the environmental conditions and residential concerns of Gila County, Arizona. The recordings are posted at the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension YouTube channel. So if you can Google that in there and find it, you'll find all of those garden and country extension webinars that I've been doing. And I'd like to let you know that the University of Arizona is an equal opportunity affirmative action institution. And I may have to stop share here because I put together a poll to help us answer that question about being an affirmative action institution. So would you please take a moment to respond to this poll if you are an attendee and let us know if you're an adult or not, and indicate your gender and ethnic group. And I'll leave this up here for a minute or two so I can get that responded to. There's just a handful of us, so we really appreciate your time to do this. All right, we're getting pretty close to the end here. I won't necessarily end the polling, but we'll put that down so I can get back into our introduction. But thank you so much. I'm going to start doing that because that's information I need to report. So appreciate your time taking care of that for us. So today, here's our agenda. Thank you for those of you who logged in early. And today, I'm doing the welcome. My name is Chris Jones, your moderator. Our topic today is transforming needs and assets, establishing a water partnership to establish environmental and economic challenges. Our presenter is Ashley Hullinger. She's going to give about a half-hour PowerPoint presentation about the project, and then we'll open it up for a chat box discussion with Ashley. We'll finish up by noon. Here is our presenter. Ashley is a research analyst at the University of Arizona Water Resources Research Center, and she's also the 2020 Flynn Brown Fellow. So Ashley, tell us about being a Flynn Brown Fellow, and congratulations, I suppose, is in order.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it was really a large honor. It's a cohort chosen annually every year, and they choose their fellows based on the position and career trajectory that they're in to be able to influence civic issues of concern. So spanning a broad range of different kind of topics and policy areas. And so I feel really lucky to be able to converse with other peers, colleagues about the same position or levels in their career that I am, and work all over the place in terms of education, water, and medical fields, and working at the state level or at local levels. So we get to talk with, we've talked to actually the governor, different state senators. We've been able to get one-on-one kind of counseling on how to understand different policy issues and be able to connect our work in a better way throughout the state. So it's pretty great, and I would encourage anyone who's kind of interested or on that path as well to check it out, Flynn Brown.
Cool. Well, congratulations. Being able to make all that networking and meeting people like that just really builds us as professionals. What a great opportunity.
Definitely.
So at this time, I'm going to invite you to bring up your slides and let us know about what we're up to.
Okay, so we're going to have to switch the slides around a little bit, but I'll share. And then How does that look, Chris?
Looks like you're ready to go.
All
Okay.
right. Well, thank you for joining us today. Chris and I were talking about how neither of us had much time to reach out to all the folks who have been involved and ask them to join for this meeting. But I was going to mention that this discussion of watershed planning and the creation of watershed partnership in the Globe Miami area of Central Arizona is also a presentation for the Association of Natural Resources Extension Professionals annual conference coming up in May. So we're kind of killing two birds with one stone. I hate that phrase, but in this case, we're happy to be able to make this a live presentation and be able to talk with some folks who could also enjoy it outside of the conference as well. So today I'm going to talk about where this project started several years ago, back in 2016, and where and how we've gotten to where we are now, 5 years later, going on 6 years. And we've gone through many different phases. So I'm going to talk with you all about the steps that we went through and overcoming some challenges and lessons and the kind of products that resulted from this work. But Chris has been a partner through it all. So from the very start, he was a partner on our first grant to fund this work, and he continues to be a strong ally and just helping us through different local issues. We also have Michael Sarans, the program coordinator, and Paul Lafarga, a graduate research assistant, helping on this project right now. We've also had past graduate students and past staff members from the Water Resources Research Center help with this project. And we have the Water Rapids program, which I oversee, is kind of the umbrella of this, but we're all housed at the Water Resources Research Center at the University of Arizona. So back when we were actually in the office, I clearly am not in the office right now, this is where you could find us in Tucson, Arizona. And before I even get into the projects, I just want to make sure that we're all grounded in where we are in the state. And I think that maps and images can say 1,000 words. So with this map here, the first things I'd point out is that Cobre Valley is completely outside of the active management areas of the state. So the groundwater regulations and management requirements that are required in our active management areas of the state do not apply here. The other thing you might notice, if you're kind of looking, the faint blue lines are the major rivers throughout Arizona. And as you can tell, the Cobre Valley connects or touches the Salt River right up to the north. The little purple watershed here is Cobre Valley. And the Salt River is a major water source for Phoenix, the Phoenix AMA and the Phoenix metro area, which serves over 6 million people. But Cobre Valley itself does not have any major sources of surface water. So this makes it a particularly interesting area to do watershed planning and to talk about the watershed, because without that physical source of running water, perennial water, running water, it's a little bit harder to kind of tell people what they're trying to preserve or the water quality aspects. Instead, we're focusing a lot on what's unseen, the groundwater. And in this area, it is largely groundwater dependent for municipal water supplies. So that's just getting us a little peek into the challenges of working on watershed issues in the Cobre Valley. So to kind of give an overview of the last 5 years, though, I broke it down into 3 project phases approximately. So we started out with just wanting to understand the issues and compile them. And that was also part of laying the groundwork of what kind of recommendations could we give for next steps and how to continue to talk about water in this area that might not particularly focus on it all the time. We also wanted to establish priorities, gather support, and launch the partnership after that first initial stage, and then plan and implement the collaborative watershed actions, which is our current phase. And now that we have a watershed partnership established, we work with the coordinator, Victoria Hermosia, on a regular basis, and we're just one big team at this point, kind of building off of each other's work. So I'm going to get into this kind of one by one and roll through some of these milestones that we've hit. And please feel free to ask any questions. And Chris is going to be watching the chat box if you want to interrupt and ask some questions. So starting with understanding the issues, going into this area, we really were informed by a process design in the first place. So while we kind of went in and just scanned the internet and Arizona Department of Water Resources for what kind of information was out there about water, we also wanted to hear from stakeholders. This is a very stakeholder-driven process. And so when it comes to water, though, as most of us in Arizona know, everyone is a stakeholder. So we targeted our outreach in very different ways and had lots of public events as well as lots of individual meetings to be able to talk to all the different groups that would be concerned with water. And this all goes towards an idea or the outcome of co-production of knowledge. So, I'm starting here heavy with process, and then I'm not going to talk too much about process design anymore. But our theoretical standing here is that real applicable science and real use of science is going to come from melding the research with the expert need or the stakeholder expert needs, and learning about the local assets and what could be done locally that would be of most use to the people living there. So we, travel up and try to make our faces known in the area. Obviously, Chris helps a lot with that because everybody knows him. But we tried to kind of set these meetings and try to have an exchange of information and not just be asking one question and getting feedback, but making it an open exchange and discourse. So the theory would be I like putting up this complicated wheel because it's so overwhelming at first. But the few things that I would say to pick up on here is that exploring the problem is a repeated area that you have to go through in this cycle of stakeholder engagement. And the other part is that at the middle of it, we have our own organization kind of being a neutral convener, bridging organization. But we really rely heavily on those trusted community leaders and participants in the watershed planning process to steer us and guide us in the right direction. So it's hopefully never us just running free on our own. We're always being guided and bringing back. All these arrows mean that when we find something, we want to bring it back and check it out with the community members and the community itself. And lastly, just something I think is really interesting, and I put it into lots of presentations, is that we all talk about water. So especially coming from the university, we all talk about water differently and use different words to describe the environment. But I like to keep in mind that when we're talking with different people, different mindsets and perspectives and life experiences, that maybe the words we're using are not the best words. So one reminder to myself and to everybody else is to just say what you mean in the most simplest of things. I have to pull myself out of the jargon. Obviously, I was just talking about process because I've got a varied group and people might be interested in that. But overall, even talking about the aquifer, talking about groundwater, and instead of saying ecosystem, saying natural areas. And it takes a lot of practice for me, but I think this is a great table, and I would refer anyone to the Nature Conservancy's language table. So now getting back to understanding those issues, now that we're kind of steeped in the process, the watershed itself is part of the Salt River watershed. I mentioned earlier that it serves the area of Phoenix and that very large population in Phoenix, and you see the Salt River running through the entire, from the border of New Mexico to over into Phoenix. It's also part of the Gila watershed, the greater Gila watershed. And at the very cusp of this watershed, on the edge of all these other watersheds, so you've got the upper Gila over here, the middle Gila, and then the Salt, you have the Cobre Valley. And so one thing that creates a complicated situation is that the city of Globe draws their municipal water supply from the upper Gila watershed, which is also part of the San Carlos Apache Reservation. So there are a lot of different water systems, different watersheds at play. And as I will get into now, there's also past contamination and historical mining practices that are still with the communities today. So the mines are very involved with the community and in the education about what's kind of gone on and how water is being treated today is well known. But there's other issues such as the cesspools in the area that the Tri-Cities Sanitation District has been working to address with a new wastewater treatment plant. And these things all affect economic development. So the groundwater quality being impacted by not just mining, but also some of the domestic practices in the area or infrastructure, kind of aging and issues with infrastructure is a major economic concern that in some cases could be deterring further investments and even people moving to this area or viewing it as a viable place to live if they're concerned with the water. So I would just point out in this graphic, it's looking at the profile of the watershed. It's not to scale or anything, obviously very conceptual, but the main thing is that the superficial aquifer, that shallow groundwater that lies underneath Penal Creek that goes through Globe is contaminated and is being treated currently to address that polluted groundwater plume, but they have to draw below that to the Gila conglomerates. So municipal water supplies are actually coming from the mostly separate Gila conglomerate groundwater from below the contaminated area. And with thinking about what's going on below the surface, on top of the surface, you actually have these great riparian areas, cottonwood stands, and the proximity to the communities makes it very accessible and very visible. So a lot of work that could be done on the waterways going through both Globe and Miami and leading north into the Salt River have a lot of potential, and they really add a lot of character and just beauty and I think natural respite to the community members. So they are a valued resource, and there are many plans to take advantage of them. One of those plans is the Penal Creek Trail, with a demonstration loop having been in the works now for several years, and planning on this 9-mile Penal Creek Trail that would go through Globe has been in the works for over 20 years now, about 25 years. So what we were able to do in this work was kind of pull out these things and try to connect them to university resources. And I'll get into that a little bit more later, but this was just a great example of there are challenges, but there's also great opportunities in this area to overcome them. And finally, in terms of some of the issues that we needed to come to understand, and even thinking about the Penal Creek Trail and the challenges to be able to implement that trail, land ownership being so broken up and patchwork in the area with a large amount of forest service. So the Tonto National Forest obviously surrounds all of the private lands in the cities and makes up most of the watershed. And then you've got the private land that is available is also kind of difficult to build on. And then this crosshatch area are the mines. And so that also, there's more prospects all the time of working with the mines and how to either build in right-of-ways or look at closed sites for future development. But at this time, there's very little land that's available to be developed. And once we understood these things, what we really wanted to do was understand from people how they've experienced the watershed. So kind of have the technical overview, pooling for resources, asking for interviews and trying to understand the science. But we wanted to also know the social side. And so in 2016, we had a really great community event, which brought out about 70 people from the community. We gathered at the Bullion Plaza, which is a beautiful restored building in Miami. And we put up butcher block along the walls. People wrote events that they remembered or that they knew about. Either they were told stories or they read in books about natural resources events and even cultural historical events from the area. So it was a really great night that we were able to transform into the poster that you just saw. It was written up in the Globe Miami Times, local paper. And it's also an online app. And so these apps have been really useful in terms of going through online, and you can check it out for yourself, and being able to look at the recordings. So we recorded the individuals from the community telling their stories, and you're able to click through and read more information about each of those timeline events. So that was one really wonderful product from all of it. And one of the recommendations that we had coming out of both the science and the community input that we've been receiving and that we've been gathering was that a watershed partnership might be helpful in pulling together some of these jurisdictional concerns and pulling together the work that was happening maybe a little bit siloed and directing a real focus on water and watershed health. So the Watershed Partnership is something that you can see all throughout the West as being a model of ways to pull in all these diverse perspectives, gain local participation, and kind of step over those bureaucratic limitations. So it is a really good structure to work through. And it also has the benefits of being cost saving. So once these projects are in the works and you have the know-how and you have the people already gathered, you're going to save a lot of time and money when the project or the funding comes around to be able to implement, that you've already got all the right people in the room. So not only is it the stewardship of limited resource and all of the public education side that benefits, but there's also real tangible benefits for getting projects done faster, sooner, and having a process to do them. So that recommended first step of establishing a watershed partnership coming out of all of the gathering of resources and information required some pulling in of also support from the community and a initial push. And so what I'm showing here are our first presentations that we did around the community in the fall of 2018. Was to really ask people if they would be interested and if they would support this. And we were looking to, especially the city and town, so City of Globe and Town of Miami, their councils, presenting to Gila County, and having lots and lots of individual conversations with nonprofits, government, local governments, mining where we could, and other community members to ask for that kind of support. So that was, I don't think that the partnership would have been established if we didn't do that initial push. And it was really important to be able to engage our decision makers at that level. So once we started to think about a watershed partnership, we wanted to be able to start building that groundwork and laying out as much of the information and kind of direction that the community would want to go, so that the watershed partnership could hit the ground running. And before I say anything more about a watershed, I did put this in as a reminder to myself, this slide, to tell you about a watershed. And this picture, I think, does a great job of just thinking about how precipitation would hit the ground, how rain would, or snow would collect, gather, and be funneled down into the community. So there's Globe down below, and it reaches the larger Penal Creek, and Penal Creek runs to the Salt River, which then eventually goes into Roosevelt Lake and to Phoenix. So this is one big network, and thinking about how our resources are managed in this watershed way really kind of hopefully makes us think about our effects on downstream users as well as their effects on us. So that is the idea of looking at the watershed as a whole and making it easier for different landowners and managers to come together to talk about these different natural resources. And so the way that we first gathered priorities was a forum on water. We had about 50 members come together in Bullion Plaza once again, and we put together a water handbook that laid out some of the major water topics and laid out surface water, quality, groundwater, some initial water budget figures, and we asked the community members to talk about their priorities and rank them. So we came out with some different results, but a lot of, and had the different participants rank them based on what they think needs to be pushed up higher for feasibility's sake, as well as what's most crucial to be able to put our ducks in a row to continue this work. Ecological stewardship, public awareness, and a framework for private-public partnerships and long-term thinking about water supplies were really hitting the top of the list in that meeting. And so all of this being building on each other, once we had the Cobre Valley Watershed Partnership established, and it was funded and started to kind of kick into gear back in 2019, a couple years ago, we already had some priorities to work with, a vision statement, and different goals. So it was very exciting to see that. And we continue to work with them and bring in university support. So we had the first forum to set priorities, a second forum to update and hear about new initiatives that were going on in the community, so a real community focus. And then also looking at the water budgets and where we might see a deficit. So a little bit more education and understanding there. And part of all of this was also bringing in the University of Arizona in two primary ways. First was the CAPLA, College of Architecture, Planning and Landscape Architecture, put together a planning guideline and research documents. So we went to them and asked them, and so it was a semester-long project of 6 grad students, planning grad students, coming and working on different policy initiatives or things that could be implemented in the community. And then a separate group that worked with them together, but a landscape architecture group that actually provided recommendations on a Cobre Valley rail trail. And those recommendations, I think, are still being used and passed around right now because the trails conversation is very big, and recreation is a major priority of the community. So these were very helpful. And then looking ahead to the future, the University of Arizona Law School Natural Resources Clinic also was able to provide some information about how the adjudication that's affecting the entire Gila River, which covers a large majority of Arizona, how that adjudication might affect the Globe, Miami area, thinking into the future. So these are sort of resources that we are really happy to be able to have partnered on and have for when they're necessary. And most recently, just in November 12th and 13th, we had our 3rd annual forum, once again, changing up the themes, collecting, checking in on past work, but then moving to some issues that maybe we haven't been able to talk about as much. Healthy forest and healthy watershed was of particular concern. Clearly, the wildfires in the West are just a devastating and tragic part of life. And so talking about what the Watershed Partnership and what community members and the different land managers could do together to improve and restore our landscape in a way that would also benefit our overall watershed and water resources. So that was a virtual event, obviously adjusting for COVID, and it came out with several action plans as well as informing our ecosystem services study that we are currently working on. So looking at that, we're pulling in resources like this. This map is just an example of some of the work we're doing to be able to gather the most relevant and recent data on drought and fire and the ecosystem services that might be impacted by those different threats. So this was a kind of a stunning map for me as well, I'll just add, because it was the first time in October that the Cobre Valley and Globe Miami area had ever seen exceptional drought. over, the last 25 years of drought and pulling from all of that data from the 80s. That was the first few weeks that we had ever experienced exceptional drought. So that was really striking and frightening. And this is also another example of the flows and the kind of issues that we'll be looking at into the future and collecting and kind of informing the Watershed Partnership and the work that they do. So looking at the stream gauge on the Penal Creek, just north of Globe, there is a discernible decline in flows over the last 40 years. And this work will all be wrapped up in the Ecosystem Services report that we'll be releasing. We're doing this in installments. So the second installment will be coming in May to look at risks. The first installment looked at benefits. And we're hoping, as I mentioned before, that all of this can be put into the work that the Watershed Partnership is doing. So while we look at the Watershed Partnership to implement, the university can be able to supply some of the information and ground and kind of substance for proposals or backing for the reason to work on these things. And finally, just thinking about all of this work, I sort of threw a lot of information in here because so much has been done over the last 6 years. But when you stand back and think about what we really accomplished and the challenges we overcame, those different ways to engage and talk with stakeholders, it's kind of a constant responsibility to be checking in, especially if you don't live in the community. And so myself living in Tucson, I rely on Chris a lot, but I also want to be able to know the people and keep up a relationship and trust that I'm not going to disappear or use this information that we are given in an inappropriate way. So that and just kind of locating and updating data. And now we're at the point that we've gathered so much that it's really making it accessible to others, and keeping track of where all that information came from so that it can continue to be used. What we don't want to happen is that all of this information that's been gathered is just kind of disappears into the ethos, and 10 years from now, somebody's going to have to redo all of this work. So finally, encouraging the collaboration among all the different kind of personalities. This is just a core element of stakeholder engagement, and it's kind of one of the wonderful parts and can be challenging too, of talking to all these different perspectives and coming around a table and kind of trying to make a productive conversation. So we've been really kind of blessed with such a passionate and supportive group of community members who attend our forums and are willing to attend other kind of science coordination meetings. They help out the Watershed Partnership in Victoria with watershed cleanups, and there's just so many different ways that if you offer the support, they will come, and if you offer the information, it can be put to good use. So yeah, all of this, maintaining engagement and building the consensus and common ground, I would just end on that it's not something that keeps going without attention. All of this takes fostering and love and constant attention. So one of my fears, but also something that I make sure to think about throughout every phase of a project, is that how is this going to be maintained and who will it live with? Because we don't want that kind of collaboration and the common ground that's built to dissipate after the project is over. So building that in as much as possible is definitely a big part of everything. And so with that, I left out lots of details. So if you had any questions about the specific research that we've done, the kind of outcomes from the research or the science, or any of those specific meetings that we mentioned with stakeholders, future pathways, there's still so much to talk about, everything to talk about with this project. I'm happy to answer questions, but thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you very much, Ashley. That was an excellent summary of all that's been going on over the 5 or 6 years. So it's fun for me to revisit that journey of all the different iterations that we've made into the community and building partnerships for the Cobre Valley Watershed Partnership. And for anybody who's not from here, Cobre is copper. So as she showed in that sign, one of the maps, we saw a significant footprint of our copper mines in the community. And so that's a big part of what the community does and is about. So I'd like to encourage people to put some questions and comments into the chat box for Ashley and or I to respond to. One of the things that I would like to ask is, in your opinion, where do you think the effort and the partnership has had some of the best impacts? What are those impacts that you're thinking, you like to share?
Well, I think on a one-to-one kind of basis of the individual conversations we've had, that perspective of even what a watershed is has gone a long ways. And the university, we've worked on that, Chris, and Victoria with the partnership has made a special effort of every time we come together, talk, let's remind folks what a watershed is and why it matters and why we're talking about it. So just that kind of that baseline information has been really key. And I remember coming in and trying to pull together resources and find the research. And there's a lot of known about this area, but not all of it is open to the public. So some of that's proprietary information with the mines. So actually what's available online or from the Department of Water Resources is a little bit more slim. So gathering that all together and making it available to the public to be able to access, I think that is a major outcome that we can sort of look at as not being a very, I guess, it's not very sexy to say that we put together a lot of resources and information, but when people need that information, it's there and provided, and having that foundation is really important. I think some of the other successes that we've had were actually being able to support efforts that were already happening. So with the recreation groups in the area that are really interested in trails, recreation, I get this question sometimes of why are we even talking about recreation in the same breath as water resources. And recreation is one of the best ways for people to interact with their watershed and really start to become those stewards of the watershed. There's also the education opportunities involved and kind of connected that can be linked in with different recreation groups and signage and ways of being able to identify restoration sites. So we just went out last Friday and looked at a trail that had some erosion and could possibly cause problems in the future, and being able to have a watershed partnership there to apply for funds and address those issues. It kind of, water touches everything, so it's connected to all these different groups, and we're just trying to make sure that we identify all of those things that could be done and start sending them off to people who might be able to work with that information.
Thank you. Some of the things that I think about and most impressed with the partnership is everybody who comes to the table. And so coming in, doing that groundwork to build the trust in the partnerships, we've got our cities coming together. We've got the mining companies coming together. We've got the federal lands coming together. We've got, all of those real important players saying, we realize water is an issue and we realize we have to work together. We can't be at odds about it. We need to work together. So that's the only way the community can go forward. And this, where we live in the desert here, it's dry. We have to use that water. And another thing I've been really appreciative of is the willingness and vision to deal with those types of issues that are watershed related, that we had all the wildfires last year. We had the fires of the Salt Fire and the Griffin Fire right next to right next to town. And so we dealt with that in that webinar. We were able to reach out to a lot of people about it. We're doing some more Walnut urban interface education and programming here in the county and or in the Cobre Valley area. And I really appreciate that this partnership and you are part of that. The noxious weed issues, so what we may or may not have been looking at or thinking about just groundwater, it's integrated watershed management at all touches, and even what and the wildcat dumping, just the cleanup projects. So really appreciate you and Victoria getting in there and helping with those projects.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't know if we want to make Victoria to talk at some point. I think she's on, but I wanted to also say that without these opportunities for people to come together, water is often just not talked about or addressed at all. And so, in one way, the fact that we're talking or having these conversations, let alone with all of the great representation and the community members showing up for it, you know, that takes effort and that takes a concentration. And so thinking about Bureau of Reclamation as being a source of support and funding for this kind of work, you know, if people are just working in silos and not talking with each other unless they need to, or unless the crisis hits, that's what we're trying to preempt. We're trying to have this proactive approach. And so that's why I hope, you know, some people are tired, can get tired of meetings, and that's why the forums, we hope, will be that interesting time that if you don't want to talk on a monthly basis, that you can come on a year and find out what's been going on and keep up to date.
That's great. Got a comment here in the chat from John Little, and John saying, from personal experience, I understand that getting the structure and process is an achievement in itself. What are more tangible results have occurred or anticipated in the near future? We've been talking about that, but there's other things we can touch on for John. What do you think of, or some of the results when those studies?
Yeah, I would actually maybe look at the most recent work and recent conversations we've been having with rangeland folks. So starting with our forum in November, when we're talking about healthy forests and healthy watersheds, we had Lori Brown from the Payson area, a rancher from the Payson area, participate on a panel with Forest Service, with San Carlos Apache Reservation, Forestry Department, Salt River Project, and others, and county officials, to talk about how their land management is part of the landscape and how they are stewarding the land and impacted by these fires as well. And so that kind of set a course in motion, and that then we talked with the city of Globe, and they've been having these conversations with the Gila County cattle growers as well. So we're hearing that these conversations are happening in different places, and what kind of lessons can be learned, what can be changed to make sure that these fires maybe don't impact as many lives and property. And so now we're looking to have a public event in the summer to focus on rangelands and bring all these different voices and kind of provide more information, because a lot of people don't know what's happening on ranches. They don't have much information. So to be able to kind of go from people want to know more to being like, we'll set that in motion, and hopefully improve communications among a lot of different groups that don't have a chance to talk otherwise.
Great. Well, we've still got some more time for questions. If people want to ask, you can put it in the chat box. You can raise your hand and I can promote you to where we can speak. You can unmute and talk to us. So.
And while you're doing that, I was also thinking about, we had a science coordination meeting on Tuesday, just this week, and we had the invasive species specialist from the Tonto National Forest and the Phoenix office talk about his work and the restoration he does with community members throughout the Tonto National Forest, which is huge. And from that, you know, I got an email from a mining representative who attended the meeting that they would like to be able to learn more about this and potential ways to work with Forest Service to address invasive species. Thinking about a rangelands meeting that we might organize in the future, then we might want to have that invasive species group would be ready to be signed up and take volunteers to go out and do some work. So there's just so many ways that just having the conversation and starting it can lead to, like, you know, that butterfly effect of good things happening. So
That's cool. You're getting some people saying nice things. Water Resources Research Center says, great presentation, Ashley. It's nice to see the work presented in this way. I agree. We've got some water challenges in our community. And just knowing, you know, we're having to, we get our groundwater from the Gila conglomerate that we know the vast majority of that is under the San Carlos Indian Reservation. We have to negotiate what we get out of those programs, out of the wells. Those wells have served our community very well for going on 60, 70 years now. It's a nice clean water source, deep water. We're doing our best to make that last through time. And just what are some of your thoughts of sustainable water for the Cobre Valley area, what you've learned here, and what you know around the state and with your career?
Yeah, well, I would say first off that every community I've worked with in Arizona is different, and that's kind of part of the Flynn Brown. Part of my reason for being part of the Flynn Brown Fellowship was to be able to speak for some of the rural issues that I've been engaging with over the last few years. Because they aren't often known, and that groundwater dependence is one issue that is actually prevalent among a lot of rural communities in Arizona. And since we are outside of an active management area where there's regulations or at least ways to recharge the pumping and track how much is being pumped, that lack of information is something of how much water is being pumped and used up and what the trajectory of water supplies are in the future is kind of an area of concern for sure for our water management on the supply side. And then there's the quality side, which I think there's a lot of folks that are doing a lot of due diligence, and the drought and fires don't help with that. But I would say that moving forward, what I would really like to be able to see is that the utilities become more involved with ideas for restoration and this idea of a one water, in which our stormwater, our wastewater, and the groundwater, surface water are all one. And so how are we using them for the most efficiency? And what are the innovations that, yes, it takes money, but that's what the partnership is for, is to be able to come together. And it's hard to get those funding opportunities to implement, and the infrastructure is very, very expensive. But I think that with recharge projects and working with Salt River Project, who will invest and engage with communities, there's a lot of ways that maybe we could do and look at improvements and seek help and seek assistance. So that's what I'm hoping that we're moving towards. And I think we are.
That's great. And I just think about some of the early wins, and I don't know if we had an influence or not, or the cities were going to do this anyway, but there's been a lot of work on our water infrastructure, old pipes and mains that water would flow through. Those got replaced and worked on. You know, I remember the highway being torn up. They were working on those water pipes. They did a lot to improve our meters that we get at our homes, and just a better, you know, that water coming out of the ground is groundwater. It needs to go to the user, and we can't afford to be losing it on the way. So I really commend the City of Globe and Miami and others who have been working on that infrastructure part of it. It's all, there's so many little pieces to put together, like you were saying.
Right. And yeah, they have been doing so much work just in the last few years. And those 10% losses, I think they keep them under 10% losses, but still with these small aging systems that you find all over Arizona, it's definitely an area that difficult to fix, but it's kind of the lowest hanging fruit as well. Wastewater is also increasing in value. So in the Globe Miami area, wastewater is used by some of the mining companies, but also there's ways that it can be applied for recharge, for crops, for also restoration projects. So that area where the City of Globe discharges actually has great tree stand and everything because it's where they've been discharging. So yeah, lots of things to look at.
Good. So we've got a few more minutes here. Some people have been participating in the watershed group with us, and I was asking Ashley about some of the impacts or some of the things that we've seen the watershed partnership making in the community. If you've got any comments or anything to share, go ahead and raise your hand and I can open it up. I can what's called allow to talk on this end. And so just want to open that up before we close down here.
Yeah, I actually would totally like to pick on Michael since we've got him here. And he's somewhat new to the project. He's been working on it for about 1.5 years now. And I'm kind of curious from Michael's perspective and the work he's been doing on ecosystem services and evaluating rangelands and recreation. And if there was anything that you would have put in that presentation that I didn't address, Michael.
Oh gosh, thanks for putting me on the spot like that.
That's how it is around here, Michael.
It's not like I was multitasking. Let's see. No, I think your presentation was nicely comprehensive, and I'm glad you brought up the discussions that are starting with the rangeland folks, because that is a really important piece that I think in broader discussions of ecosystem services, for whatever reason, often gets left out, and they are an incredibly important stakeholder for a variety of reasons. And I guess I would just, to this broader discussion of how do we make projects like this work, really paying attention to the cultural identities at play. And I think rangelands is a great example of that, because it's such a strong motivator and factor in all of these discussions. So I mean, I don't know, that wasn't really useful at all, but
Of course it was. Thank
that is my comment,
Yeah.
and that's what I spend a lot of time thinking about, is and especially lately.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, nothing like we're putting you on the spot, right? Well, then with that, why don't we bring this to a close here? And let me just do that. I'm going to bring up my closing slides. Ashley Hollinger, 2020 Flynn Brown Fellow, thank you very much for talking with us today and sharing what's going on with our Watershed Partnership.
Thank you so much, Chris.
We've been having our question and answer discussion with Ashley, so thank you very much. There's also the webinar evaluation in the chat box. So if you got a chance to see that, please open it up. Just a couple of questions about the impact of today's webinar that you can share with us. And next week, we will be hosting another colleague of mine. Her name is Ann Matek. She is the principal of a private consultant, Matek Consulting Principal, and she's a natural resources and human dimensions researcher. And we had a grant and a project to do some focus groups on these, assessing the feasibility of a climate master outreach program. And so that report is done, and she's going to be she's going to be sharing, summarizing the results of that report. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with people. And that's our program today. So have a good day, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.